The Paradox of Self-Denial. This is from Become What You Are by Alan Watts. The paradox of self-denial. While living, be a dead man, thoroughly dead. Then whatever you do, just as you will be right. A Buddhist poem written in China several centuries ago tries to find words for an intuition which is common to almost every culture in the world. When translated into the familiar language of the Christian tradition, it is so well known as to be almost a platitude. He that loseth his soul shall find it. But what always preserves this thought from banality, from the mere tiresomeness of those precepts which everyone knows he ought to observe but doesn't, is that this is a saying which no one can observe. He that loseth his soul shall find it. For so long as there is something which I can do about it, I am not dead yet. I have not yet completely lost my life. Yet this is not the simple absurdity of a command impossible to obey. It is a real communication, a description of something which happens to people, like the rain or the touch of the wind. It is simply the expression of the universal discovery that a man does not really begin to be alive until he has lost himself, until he has released the anxious grasp which he normally holds upon his life, his property, his reputation, and position. It is the irreducible truth and the monkish idea of holy poverty, of the way of life to which there are no strings attached, in which, because all is lost, there is nothing to lose, in which there is this exhilaration of a kind of freedom, which is poetically likened to the birds in the wind, or to the clouds drifting in the boundless sky. It is the life which St. Paul described as poor but making many rich, as having nothing but possessing all things. What an unrealistic nostalgia we have for it. Marie Antoinette playing shepherdess in the gardens of Versailles. Presidents of great corporations retreating to lonely fishing shacks in the high Sierra. The insurance clerk walking alone on the interminable ocean sands, wondering if he would have the courage to be a beachcomber, or the moral idealist, reproaching himself because he doesn't have quite the strength to abandon a comfortable salary and plunge into the slums. Like Peter Morin and Dorothy Day, or the great exemplars St. Francis and St. Vincent de Paul. But most of us know that we will not and probably cannot do it, that we shall continue to cling to our habitual ways of life with all the helplessness of addicts to a destroying passion. If this begins to sound like a sermon, I do not mean it that way, for I said at the beginning that the words about finding one's life through losing it were not really a precept that could simply be practiced and obeyed. This is what makes all the talk about the necessity of selflessness or the task of transcending the ego so fantastically misunderstood. Treated as a precept, it makes for every kind of moral and spiritual phoniness. Always have a large pinch of salt handy when you meet the fellow who talks about trying to renounce himself to overcome his ego. I am reminded, I'm going to actually stop there. That's great. So, finding, he that loseth his soul shall find it. This whole path of letting it all go, or like he says, transcending the ego, and the phoniness that comes with saying that that's what you're trying to do. In that longing of holy poverty. When he says that presidents of great corporations retreating to lonely fishing shacks in the high Sierra, why? Why do we retreat? The insurance clerk walking alone on the interminable ocean sands, wondering if he could have the courage to be a beachcomber. I think we've all had certain kind of longings. I have, wondering, could I renounce myself? Obviously not, because I have kids. It would always be, when I retire. But the courage to make that change. What is it that's inside of us that is that calling to kind of get quiet and live a more reflective life? To get quiet and live a more reflective life, to detach from all the things that we have, that we desire, the wanting of more and more and more and more. There's always that thing inside of us that says, let's give it all up and, run away. What is that thing inside of us? What stuff? Cried Lao Tzu. Does not universal love contradict itself? Is not your elimination of self a positive manifestation of self? Sir, if you would cause the world not to lose its source of nourishment, there is the universe. Its regularity is unceasing. There are the sun and moon. Their brightness is unceasing. There are the stars. Their groupings never change. There are the birds and beasts. They flock together without varying. There are trees and shrubs. They grow upward without exception. Like these, accord with the Tao, with the way of things, and be perfect. Like these, accord with the Tao, with the way of things, and be perfect. Why then these vain struggles after charity and duties to one's neighbor, as though beating a drum in search of a fugitive? Alas, sir, you have brought much confusion into the mind of man. As I said, the truth about finding life through losing it is not a precept, but a report of something which happens, and happens in many different ways. It's not given to everyone to be an obvious moral hero or a notorious saint. It is not everyone's way to be a rolling stone without the responsibilities of wife and children. Nor, I should add, is it everyone's privilege to be self-sacrificing wife or model husband. And still more, it is not everyone's gift to be the contented fatalist, accepting himself and his limitations just as they are, knowing that he is a weed and not trying to be a rose. Some of us will always be trying with an exasperating degree of relative success to improve ourselves in one way or another, and no amount of self-acceptance will stop it. Self-renunciation, self-acceptance, these are all names for the same thing, for the ideal to which there is no road, the art for which there is no technique. Why then does this whole idea so commonly wear the form of precept, of advice to be followed, of a method to be applied? For obviously there is a vital contradiction in the very notion of self-renunciation, and just as much as self-acceptance. People try to accept themselves in order to be different, and try to surrender themselves in order to have more self-respect in their own eyes, or to attain some spiritual experience, some exaltation of consciousness, the desire for which is the very form of their self-interest. We are really stuck with ourselves, and our attempts to reject or to accept are equally fruitless, for they fail to reach the inaccessible center of our selfhood, which is trying to do the accepting or the rejecting. The part of ourself that wants to change ourself is the very one that needs to be changed. But is it as inaccessible as needle? as a needle to the prick of its own point. I'm trying to think of how, well, I know how this shows up in my life. I used to have a very deep desire to grow my business to a huge degree, and, in the name of helping others, and even my work as a massage therapist and healer and everything, businesswoman, in this attempt to help as many people as possible. And I imagined this huge reach to millions and millions and millions of people, and that was my purpose. And then all of a sudden something shifted in me, and it got super subtle, and I got quiet, and it was like as I worked on myself and healed through my past and began to love myself, that thing of helping people started to fade away, because I realized it's about me. It's the inner working, I guess, and radiating that is what made sense to me, is what actually, permeates more than thinking that I'm helping people. So my inner self permeating, because it's coming from a genuine place, I have found radiates, or whatever. There's just more genuine love in that. And so my desire just faded and faded and faded, and it became more subtle, like I said, and my work shifted, I guess, more about my inner workings, and, instead of like an external thing, it became an internal thing, focusing on being a mom and business owner, but losing that attachment to helping others, because it kind of feels like none of my business, and I didn't feel as connected anymore to doing massage. And, I feel connected to some things, but more of, having a place for others to start to fulfill whatever it is, like basically holding space. That's kind of like the job that I have right now, is holding a space for others to do the work that they feel guided to do. And then this is just sharing, really, just like communing. Communing is important, focusing on being a good mom and partner and friend, and all of that, and boundaries, and just releasing the need to think that I'm helping, like inputting myself in ways that it was creating attachments that became tiring for me as I began to fade like away from that desire to help others. Like I had created these attachments, like people started to attach themselves to me in ways that I could not fulfill what it was that they were looking for. Like I'm not that. And at some point there was a cycle that worked, because I felt like I was serving my purpose, and it was fulfilling in a way. But as that faded, as I really began to heal and love myself, that desire to like always feel like I was helping others faded. And so finding the self, right? Like it seems to be that just everything happens in the present moment. And it's also fleeting. So there's moments of that non-attachment, right? Of like, I have everything in this moment. I don't need to grasp and cling to anything. And that the subtleties, looking into my children's eyes and having a moment with Josh, or whatever it is, those small moments, everything that happens in each moment seems to be what is really important. That seems like finding myself more than anything else. So I'm going to leave you with that. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to comment and start a conversation, or, whatever your reflections are on this. But thank you. And I will see you next time.